There are no safe spaces. There are only safe people. Hey leader, David Burkus here, organizational psychologist and author of 5 best-selling books on helping you and your team do their best work ever. And in this episode, we're gonna talk about building psychological safety at work. Over the past several decades, there has been a myriad of research that essentially proves, as strong as you can prove in psychology research, that psychological safety is one of the core components of a high-performing team. And in common sense, we talk about this often, except our misconception about psychological safety is that it just equals trust. We talk about trusting teams all of the time. I've yet to meet a well-intentioned leader who doesn't know that they need to build trust on their team. The problem is that psychological safety is not just trust. It's a climate of mutual trust and respect on the team. And that difference matters. You can build trust such that someone is willing to take a risk. And that, after all, is the definition of psychological safety, a climate where people feel it's safe to take interpersonal risks. So you build trust to get people to take the risk, but how you respond afterwards determines whether or not they actually feel like that risk was worth it. Do they feel heard or do they feel rejected? Do they feel like their idea was considered or do they feel like it was shot down immediately? So in this episode, we're gonna go over 4 different ways you can build psychological safety at work. And pay attention, because some of them build trust, some of them build respect, but all of them together build psychological safety and hence higher levels of performance on your team. Let's get started. So the first way to build psychological safety on your team as a leader is to admit weaknesses. Yeah, I know that sounds weird, right? But admit the things you're actually bad at. Admit those weaknesses you have in your own work and in your own career. And this is a little counterintuitive, right? As leaders, we're usually promoted into that leadership role because we were phenomenal individual contributors. And as we grow in our strengths, we grow in our expertise, we grow in the level of authority that we attain inside an organization. We become leaders of bigger and bigger teams. So it can be hard, if strength is what got you into the role, to come to terms with the idea that admitting weaknesses is what's going to get your team to that next level. But it really is true. Number 1, because you're not perfect. Your team already knows what the weaknesses are. But number 2, the act of admitting them demonstrates to the team that you trust them and inspires them to trust you more in return. You are taking the first risk by admitting those weaknesses, and hopefully they respond in kind with respect for you being honest about your situation, and they trust you in return. The second way to build psychological safety at work and on a team is to ask for feedback. Yeah, ask for feedback on a regular basis. And this is not just walking around with a trite little, how am I doing? And expect everybody to tell you you're doing great. This is seeking big, constructive feedback that can help you become a better leader. My favorite simple way to get feedback as a leader is to give people a warning ahead of time. Hey, I'd love to talk to you about how I can better serve you as a leader. Let's set aside 15, 20 minutes to do that. Give them a warning. But then ask them 2 simple questions that are going to help you get the feedback you need as a leader. What do you appreciate about me as a leader? And what would be even better if I started doing? So if you're familiar with the very trite sort of start, stop, continue, this is kind of like that, except we're not going to waste time on the stop. A lot of times people say they wish their boss would stop doing things that are crucial to their task. So that's not really a productive question. But what are the things you wish I'd continue? What are the things I'm doing well? And what are the things you wish I would add on? Now, it's not just the feedback itself, which is going to be incredibly useful. It's the fact that you asked and the fact that you can say, oh, thank you for that feedback. I'm going to do the best I can to apply it. And over time, they see that you are applying it. That's going to grow their level of trust in you and make them more willing to have open, honest conversations and take their own interpersonal risks. Just like admitting weaknesses, it's another way to go first in this trust, risk, respect cycle that builds psychological safety. The third way to build psychological safety at work and on a team is to celebrate failures. And this is a team-wide way to build psychological safety. Now, when I say celebrate failures, what I don't mean is that we're going to create awards for people who are just grossly negligent or hand out trophies for people who lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. What I mean is that failure is inevitable on a team. as your team is pursuing their objectives, their KPIs, as they're trying to accomplish their project goals, they're going to run into setbacks, they're going to run into struggles, they're going to try things, and those things aren't going to work out. And when they do, when that happens and you discuss what happened and what we can learn from it and how we can pivot, we celebrate the transparency it took for individuals to admit failure, and we celebrate the learning that came from that failure. So we're not just celebrating that we lost, we're celebrating that we learned. And that makes all the difference in the world, not only to send a message to the team that it's safe to take those risks from time to time, to take intelligent risks, but it also sends a message to the team that we value learning because we trust that if we just keep learning, we'll keep winning more and more and more. And the fourth and final way to build psychological safety at work and on a team, and this is especially important if you're a leader, but equally important even if you're just a team member, is to amplify unheard voices. On every team, there are voices you're not hearing from as often as others. I mean, you probably already know who the loud, obnoxious person in your team is. But do you know who you're not hearing from? And there's a lot of reasons people don't speak up all that often. Maybe they're from a historically marginalized group and they don't feel comfortable sharing that. They don't feel included yet, and that's something we need to work on. Or maybe it's just that the medium of communication we chose for that meeting and that discussion favors a certain type of communicator. As you can tell, I'm kind of loud, I talk fast, and I take up a lot of space when I talk. And so if we're meeting in person or even on Zoom, someone like me is going to tend to dominate that conversation. If the discussion is happening via text, for example, like an email or in a project management software, that's going to favor the better, more contemplative writers who can write out long arguments. Every medium of communication is going to favor some people and not others. And then there's a lot of other reasons why we don't hear voices. So when we do, when those people do speak up, because they're not being heard very often, we need to amplify that. We need to say, stop the meeting. Hey, Sarah, thank you so much. Could you dive into that a bit more? I want to make sure we don't overlook your point. Little things like that call attention to the contribution made. They send Sarah, in this example, they send Sarah a message that her voice is valued, but they also send a message to the team that everyone's idea needs to be considered. That this isn't a fight to get your ideas out because only some people on the team are going to be willing to fight. This is the type of team that will fight against that and fight to be the type of team that includes everyone and hears those voices. And it starts by amplifying the voices you're not hearing that often when you do hear them, so that you hear them more often. Now, as you look at these, it's pretty clear to see some of them are about building trust in you as a leader or trust across the team so that people want to take those interpersonal risks. And some of them are about what happens after the risk. All of them, though, contribute to that cycle. Psychological safety is not just trust. It's trust to take risks and then having those risks respected so that we grow in our trust as a team as a whole. And when you do that, when you kick off that flywheel, what you're gonna find is that the level of trust on your team grows pretty quickly, but the level of respect takes a little bit more time to build. So focus a lot with your team on building that respect, because otherwise that flywheel reverses and turns around. We don't want that. We want to kick off that flywheel where people are taking bigger and bigger risks, sharing more and more vulnerabilities, and learning much more from each other. And when we do that, we turn our team into a high-performing team, and more importantly, a team where everyone feels like they can do their best work ever. Oh, and one more thing. If you're curious about this trust part, the part that kicks off trust, risk, respect, you'd probably be curious to know that there's actually two different types of trust on a team, and they're built a little bit differently. So you're gonna check out this video here on the two types of trust on a team. Trust me, you're gonna love it.